Bashar al-Assad's legacy as Syria's ruler is marred by betrayal, not only of his nation but of every ally and relationship he once relied on. In his desperate bid to flee Syria, Assad reportedly provided Israel with sensitive information about Syria's military installations and weapons factories, enabling Israeli forces to target these sites with precision. This betrayal, many argue, is the root cause of Israel's ongoing strikes on Syrian territory. But this is just one chapter in a long history of deceit. In 2011, Assad played a pivotal role in the downfall of Muammar Gaddafi by supplying the French military with Gaddafi's satellite phone number, which directly aided in his capture and eventual death. Further deepening the web of treachery, Assad sought refuge by secretly reaching out to US-backed forces, requesting their withdrawal, a move that deeply eroded Russia's trust in him. Today, Russian President Vladimir Putin maintains a conspicuous silence toward Assad, refusing any communication with him since his arrival in Russia. As if his situation couldn't worsen, recent reports suggest that Assad has been poisoned, casting a shadow over his safety in exile, and his wife has filed for divorce, signaling her intention to return to the UK, where she was born. After a trail of betrayal this extensive, one must ask, can Vladimir Putin or anyone ever truly trust Bashar al-Assad again? History has often chronicled the rise and fall of dictators, but few have fallen with such profound disgrace and betrayal as Bashar al-Assad. Once the face of a regime that dominated Syria with an iron fist, Assad fled his country under the cover of darkness, abandoning not only his post but also the countless individuals and nations who had sacrificed for his survival. This betrayal, spanning family, allies, and a nation, paints a chilling portrait of a man whose cowardice and self-interest knew no bounds. Bashar al-Assad had been a leader in name only. To understand the gravity of Assad's betrayal, we must first examine the man himself. Bashar al-Assad was not a leader forged in the fires of revolution or hardship. He was a man thrust into power by circumstance, inheriting a brutal regime from his father, Hafez al-Assad. Unlike his father, a cunning and ruthless tactician, Bashar lacked charisma and political instinct. Raised in privilege and pampered within the confines of his father's regime, Bashar grew up surrounded by intelligence officers and a culture of repression. This sheltered upbringing left him emotionally stunted and disconnected from the realities of leadership. His speeches, often monotonous and devoid of genuine empathy, reflected a man out of touch with the people he ruled. His governance relied not on strategy but on the legacy of fear and violence inherited from his father. Yet, even this legacy was not enough to sustain him. When the moment of reckoning came, Bashar al-Assad chose flight over fight, proving himself a leader in name only. A betrayal of family and trust, Assad's departure to Russia was more than an act of cowardice, it was a deeply personal betrayal to those closest to him. His extended family, including his brother Meir and sister-in-law Mana Assad, were left humiliated and blindsided. Mana, in a scathing post on social media, labeled him the traitor of the family and the homeland. This public condemnation from within his own family highlights the depth of resentment and betrayal felt by those who had stood beside him through years of conflict. This betrayal was not merely emotional. Assad's escape left his family vulnerable to the anger and retribution of those who had suffered under the regime. Those who had invested their loyalty in him, sacrificing their lives and reputations, were abandoned without warning. For a family that had prided itself on unity and strength, this act of deception was a devastating blow. Assad's betrayal extended far beyond his family. He also abandoned allies who shed blood for him. For years, regional allies had propped up his regime, often at great cost. Groups like Hezbollah sent fighters to Syria, sacrificing lives to protect Assad's hold on power. These sacrifices were not insignificant. Entire families mourned the loss of sons who fought in Syria, believing their sacrifices were for a cause greater than themselves. Yet, in fleeing, Assad rendered these sacrifices meaningless. Imagine the anguish of a Lebanese mother who lost her child fighting for Assad's regime. Imagine the frustration of Hezbollah's sheikh named Qassem, who invested political and military capital in defending Assad, only to see him abandon the cause without a word of warning. These are not just political betrayals, they are human tragedies, marked by loss and disillusionment. Leaders like Mohammed bin Zayed of the UAE and Kais Sait of Tunisia also found themselves humiliated. Both had taken significant political risks to normalize relations with Assad, advocating for his reintegration into the Arab world. Their efforts were not driven solely by ideology but by a pragmatic desire for stability in the region. By fleeing, Assad not only betrayed their trust but also undermined the delicate diplomatic efforts that had been years in the making. The legacy of repression and violence with Bashar al-Assad. To truly grasp the extent of Assad's betrayal, we must look at the regime he left behind. Under Assad's rule, Syria became synonymous with brutality. Prisons like Sednaya were transformed into human slaughterhouses, where dissenters were tortured, executed, and discarded. These atrocities were not isolated incidents but systemic practices, rooted in a regime that valued power above all else. The crimes of the Assad regime were not the product of Bashar's rule alone. They were a continuation of his father's legacy. Hafez al-Assad, who seized power in 1970, ruled Syria with an iron fist, crushing opposition and cultivating a culture of fear. Bashar inherited this legacy and expanded upon it, employing methods of repression that were both medieval in their cruelty and modern in their efficiency. Even in his escape, Bashar betrayed his father's legacy. By fleeing, he left behind the very machinery of oppression that had sustained his family's grip on power for decades. He abandoned the loyalists who had carried out his regime's atrocities, leaving them to face the wrath of a nation seeking justice. Assad's flight to Russia marked a turning point not just for Syria, but for the region. The immediate aftermath saw an outpouring of condemnation. Artists, politicians, and even members of his own government began to denounce him openly. His prime minister, foreign minister, and parliament speaker who had once sung his praises wasted no time in distancing themselves from the lowly dictator. Their swift condemnation underscores the fragility of the alliances that had kept Assad in power. Hamas, which had been cautiously resuming relations with Assad, quickly welcomed the fall of his regime. Even Tehran and Moscow, his most steadfast allies, showed little regret. For them, Assad's betrayal was a strategic inconvenience, not a personal loss. The irony of Assad's actions cannot be overstated. Throughout his rule, he accused others of betrayal. He labeled US-backed militias in eastern Syria as traitors and decried any opposition to his regime as treasonous. Yet, in the end, it was Assad who proved to be the ultimate traitor. His actions revealed a man who valued his own safety above the lives of his people, the loyalty of his allies, and the trust of his family. For the Syrian people, Assad's escape was both a relief and a bitter reminder of the cost of his rule. The country he left behind is a shadow of its former self, ravaged by war, poverty, and oppression. Images of destroyed cities, mass graves, and grieving families serve as a testament to the horrors of Assad's reign. His departure to Russia does little to ease the pain of a nation left in ruins. Yet, for all his betrayal and cowardice, Assad's escape may also mark the beginning of a new chapter for Syria. With his departure, the possibility of accountability and reconstruction looms on the horizon. But the scars of his rule will not fade easily. The betrayal of Bashar al-Assad is a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the profound human cost of tyranny. Bashar al-Assad's legacy is one of betrayal of his family, his allies, and his nation. His escape to Russia was the ultimate act of cowardice, cementing his place in history as a dictator who abandoned everything and everyone to save himself. For those who suffered under his rule, his flight offers little solace. It is a stark reminder that even the most brutal regimes are built on fragile foundations, and that betrayal, once sown, will eventually reap its bitter harvest. The story of Bashar al-Assad is not just a tale of one man's downfall. It is a cautionary tale for the world, a stark warning of the dangers of power without accountability, and a testament to the enduring strength of those who resist tyranny.